What is social constructionism? Social constructionism is a perspective that can be used for understanding human beings as social creatures. It draws its influence from several disciplines, including philosophy, sociology, and linguistics, which makes it multidisciplinary in nature. So rather than thinking of social constructionism as a singular theoretical framework, we can think of it as an umbrella term for a diverse set of theories, which Vivian Burr puts it, bear a family resemblance to one another. A social constructionist perspective serves as a theoretical foundation for a range of different social science approaches, like critical psychology, discursive psychology, discourse analysis, deconstruction, and post-structuralism. Let's look at some key concepts that underlie social constructionism and that can help you to understand this perspective. So the first is consensus reality. And this is the way that most people in society agree to see and understand the world. It's the shared beliefs and perceptions that shape our common understanding of what is real and true and how we should behave in response. For example, if you're driving along and I suddenly shout, "Red light," you're going to stop the car. And that's because everybody understands that it means stop, because we've all agreed on that meaning. The second point is shared meaning. So consensus reality relies on the fact that we all give the same meaning to certain symbols, like a red light and the words stop. And this creates a common understanding. This shared understanding through language and symbols helps us to navigate and make sense of the world together. So consensus reality is about shared understanding of the world that people in society agree upon, and social constructionism explains how consensus reality is formed by highlighting that our perceptions of reality are shaped by social processes, communication, and cultural norms. So, in other words, they're not just out there waiting to be discovered, they're actively created between us through consensus. To explain, let's use the example of money. Money is a social construct because its value and function are created and maintained through collective human agreement and trust, rather than any intrinsic value of the physical materials that it's made out of, the paper or the metal. So remember, it's about consensus reality. So here's how this works. People collectively agree to accept money in exchange for goods and services. This mutual trust gives money its value. Without this collective agreement, the physical representation of money would be worthless. So those coins, the notes, the digital numbers. Money acts as a symbol of value, facilitating trade and economic transactions. And the trust in money's value is so strong that people are willing to exchange real goods and services for it, even though money itself is just a representation of value, not value in itself. Governments and financial institutions reinforce and regulate the use of money, further solidifying its value and stability. They issue currency, manage monetary policy, and provide a framework that supports the economic system based on money. A $20 bill only has value because everyone agrees that it does. You can exchange it for goods and services because others also accept and trust in its value. Without this shared belief, the bill would just be a piece of paper. Like money, language functions as a social construct through shared symbols and mutual understanding. When you use currency, you need to use the same symbols, the accepted currency as everyone else in a particular region for transactions to be successful. Similarly, language is a system of symbols, words, sounds, gestures that people in a community agree upon to communicate effectively. If you went to Thailand and tried to pay with euros, the transaction would fail because the shared understanding and agreement are missing. Likewise, if you tried to make your own currency or language, it wouldn't work in the established system because others wouldn't recognize it or accept your symbols. In both cases, the symbol's effectiveness relies on shared consensus. For money, it's the collective agreement on the value of the currency. For language, it's the collective agreement on the meaning of words and symbols. Just as the correct currency is essential for economic transactions, using the agreed upon language is crucial for communication. Both systems depend on everybody using and understanding the same symbol to function smoothly within the social construct. So, for example, just as you must go use the Thai baht to make purchases in Thailand, you must use the Thai language or a mutually understood language to communicate effectively. This shared use of symbols, whether in currency or language, facilitates interaction and maintains the functioning of social systems. Of course, social constructionists consider shared meaning in relation to all forms of communication and symbolic interaction that enable people to share meanings and understandings. So the shared use of symbols, whether gestures, written text, spoken words, or currency, facilitates interaction and maintains the function of social systems. Language is a focus in social constructionism because it is through language that we create, share, and sustain our social realities. Social constructionism emphasizes that our understandings of the world are not purely objective, but shaped by the social interactions and cultural contexts in which we live. Language is the primary tool through which these interactions occur, allowing us to communicate and negotiate meanings, norms, and values. We use language to describe an event, an object, or a concept. We're not just passively reflecting reality, we are actively constructing it. Words and phrases carry specific meanings that are agreed upon within our culture or within our particular time in history, and these meanings can have an influence on how we perceive and behave in the world. So, for example, if you were listening to the radio during a civil war, you might hear the very same people being described in completely different ways depending on who the radio broadcast was produced by. If it was produced by the state, for example, you might hear people speaking about terrorists, so people that are committing treason and undermining the rule of law. If it was the radio broadcast was produced by the insurgents who want to overthrow the government for whatever reasons, you might hear them talking about freedom fighters, so people wanting to liberate their country, people from tyranny, for example. And these are very different meanings for the same person, essentially. So language shapes our experiences and understanding of reality. And this is why social constructionists are particularly interested in studying it. So doing interviews, speaking to people, focus groups, looking at newspaper articles or social media, for example. And what is quite important is that our understanding of reality and the material world is inherently shaped by language and the meanings we collectively assign to our experiences. So our reality is always mediated through language, which frames and structures our thoughts and perceptions. So it goes deeper than just the interactions that we have between people. When we acquire language as a child and learn to speak, we also learn the symbols and meanings and metaphors of our particular cultural group, and this structures the way that we think about the world. So even our internal thought processes are influenced by the linguistic and symbolic frameworks that we use. So social constructionists would argue that what we consider to be real is actually a product of social interactions and agreements, where shared language and symbols create a common understanding of the world around us. Through daily interactions between people and in the course of social life over many years, we construct different versions of reality, what we know about our world, our knowledge. And we can produce a variety of possible social constructions of events. To illustrate this a little bit further, let's look at a health example. So I'll use the example of alcohol consumption. And what the meanings that attach to excessive alcohol use have evolved over time if we look at countries like the US and Britain, westernized countries, historically a drunk person was often depicted as morally degenerate or seen as weak-willed and sinful. So we can see that they're framed in moral terms or in religious light. And this meant that they were often ostracized, socially ostracized, and maybe even not allowed to go to church, and people were instructed to pray for them. During the 19th century, later on, there was what was known as the temperance movement, and drinking was viewed as a result of bad choices, and importantly associated with criminal behavior, so leading people to commit crimes. And this meant that people who were habitually drunk were often jailed. And this is quite different to the way we understand excessive alcohol consumption in our day. Even the words that I'm using, excessive alcohol consumption, I mean, that's a very modern framing. And that's because we understand this practice, this alcoholism, right, through a medical framework. So we frame it most often as a disease that has genetic and involuntary aspects to it. And this means that as a society, if you were involved in a crime and there was an element of alcohol consumption involved, that you might most likely be sentenced to some kind of rehab. So the treatment that we see as appropriate isn't about praying for people or putting them in jail, but as rehabilitating them and applying medical interventions. And these shifts in meaning of what it means to drink too much alcohol illustrate how societal perceptions of alcohol use are shaped by the cultural context and the dominant ideologies of that particular time. And this influences how individuals are seen by others and how they're treated. And this is really just based on the prevailing beliefs about what excessive alcohol consumption means. So in closing, I want to come back to the idea that I mentioned right at the beginning, and that is that social constructionism isn't one theory, but a family of theories that bear a resemblance to one another, as Vivian Burr puts it. And I would highly recommend that you have a look at a book, which I think is called just Social Constructionism. It's very accessible and a very good introduction to the theory if you want to read more about it. So if we say that this is a family of theories that have a resemblance to one another, let's just look at what some of those resemblances might be. So I want to tease out some of the key assumptions that represent a social constructionist approach. So Kenneth Gergen, one of the key people in psychology that introduced social constructionism to psychology, said that we might loosely think of a social constructionist approach as any approach that accepts one or more of the following key assumptions. One, it takes a critical stance toward taken for granted knowledge. Two, it treats ways of understanding the world as historically and culturally specific. Three, it sees ways of knowing the world, or knowledge, as sustained by social interaction among people. And four, it highlights how specific ways of understanding maintain some form of social action and preclude others. So, in other words, how different people may be responded to or treated, and what is permissible for those people to do. So this video has focused on what social constructionism is. And in the next video, I want to zoom in and look at what we mean when we say that illness is socially constructed.